There is a moment in every soul's journey when the world reveals its true nature, not as the nurturing mother we hoped for, but as the merciless sculptor who carves beauty through breaking. You have arrived at this threshold, where the accumulated weight of 1,000 small cruelties has gathered like storm clouds above your tender heart. Each rejection, each dismissal, each moment when your authentic light was met with cold indifference or outright hostility has added another stone to the crushing burden you carry within your chest. The world cannot bear what it does not understand. And you, dear soul, have always been incomprehensible to those who mistake conformity for safety, mediocrity for wisdom. Your very existence is a threat to their carefully constructed illusions of what life should be. They see in you a mirror reflecting their own unlived possibilities, their own abandoned dreams, their own buried authenticity, and they recoil from this reflection as vampires recoil from daylight. So they have tried to break you, not with dramatic gestures or obvious cruelty, but with the slow, insidious erosion of your confidence. They have whispered that you are too much, too sensitive, too intense, too different. They have suggested with raised eyebrows and uncomfortable silences that perhaps you should consider being less of who you are. They have offered you the poisoned gift of their approval, contingent always on your willingness to diminish yourself, to compress your vastness into their narrow boxes of acceptable behavior. And you, in your beautiful, trusting nature, have tried to accommodate them. You have crafted what Jung called the persona, that mask we wear to interface with the world's expectations. Layer by layer, you have built this false self, this careful construction designed to win love through deception. You have learned to speak their language, to laugh at their jokes, to suppress the parts of yourself that make them uncomfortable. You have become an actor in the theater of their comfort, playing a role that grows more exhausting with each performance. But the persona, no matter how skillfully crafted, is still just a mask. And masks, by their very nature, are brittle things. The pressure you feel now, this overwhelming sense that you cannot breathe within the confines of who you pretend to be, is the beginning of a sacred cracking, like the shell of an egg that must break for new life to emerge. Your carefully constructed full self is beginning to fracture under the weight of its own artificiality. This moment feels like death, and in many ways it is. But not the death of who you truly are, rather, the death of who you thought you had to be to survive in a world that fears authenticity like a plague. Every crack in your persona reveals a sliver of the luminous being you have kept hidden beneath layers of protective pretense. The light that seeps through these fissures is not the desperate glow of someone seeking approval, but the steady radiance of truth itself. The shattering you feel is not your breaking, it is your breaking free. The glass prison of false identity, that once seemed so necessary for survival, is revealing itself to be exactly what it always was. A transparent cage that kept you safe by keeping you small. But safety purchased at the price of authenticity is no safety at all. It is merely a slow suffocation disguised as shelter in the depths of your unconscious, where Jung discovered the eternal patterns that govern human transformation. Something ancient stirs. It is the self with a capital S, not the ego self that desperately seeks validation, but the archetypal self that contains your totality, your wholeness, your unbreakable essence. This self has been waiting patiently beneath the rubble of your people-pleasing, beneath the debris of your self-doubt, beneath the accumulated sediment of others' projections and expectations. The pain you feel now is the pain of birth, not just any birth, but the birth of your authentic being into a world that has spent years trying to convince you that such authenticity is dangerous, selfish, unrealistic. But Jung understood what the world refuses to acknowledge, that the greatest gift we can give to existence itself is the courage to be utterly, completely, unapologetically ourselves. Those who tried to break you did so not from a place of malice, but from a place of terror. They saw in your unguarded moments, in your spontaneous expressions of joy or creativity or depth, a reminder of everything they had sacrificed on the altar of social acceptance. Your authenticity was a mirror reflecting their own abandoned selves, and they sought to destroy the mirror rather than face what it revealed. But mirrors, once shattered, create infinite reflections. And you, in your breaking, are becoming not one authentic self, but a kaleidoscope of possibilities, each fragment catching and refracting the light of truth in ways that were impossible when you were whole in your wholeness, complete in your completeness, trapped in the amber of your false perfection. The shattering glass makes music as it falls, the music of liberation, the symphony of becoming. Each piece that breaks away takes with it a limiting belief, a constraining fear, a borrowed identity that never fit quite right. What remains is not broken but revealed, the diamond core of your being that no external pressure can compress. No social expectation can reshape. No rejection can diminish. This is where your true journey begins, not in the comfortable illusion of being loved for who you pretend to be, but in the terrifying freedom of being seen for who you actually are. The glass lies in shards around your feet, and you stand in the center of this destruction like a phoenix in the ashes of its former nest, ready at last to spread wings you never knew you possessed. And so you find yourself at the threshold of the great descent, standing at the edge of an abyss that yawns before you like the mouth of eternity itself. The ground beneath your feet, once solid with the certainty of belonging, once firm with the illusion of safety, begins to crumble. You are entering the Nigredo, that sacred darkness which the ancient alchemists knew was the first and most terrible phase of transformation. Here, in this place of profound dissolution, everything you thought you could depend upon reveals itself as vapor, as shadow, as the cruel mirage of a desert traveler dying of thirst. The voices of those who once claimed to love you now echo in the caverns of your wounded heart, like thunder after lightning distant, rumbling, reverberating through the chambers of your being with a sound that shakes the very foundations of who you believed yourself to be. Their words, sharp as obsidian knives, have carved deep furrows in the landscape of your soul. You are too much, they said. You are not enough, they whispered. Who do you think you are? They demanded, their voices now haunting the corridors of your inner world, like the cries of banshees in the night. But listen. Listen closely to what the darkness is trying to teach you. For in this abyss of abandonment, in this terrible loneliness that wraps around you like a burial shroud, a profound truth begins to emerge from the shadows. Those who tried to diminish you, those who sought to clip your wings and keep you small, were themselves prisoners of their own unlived lives. They were inhabitants of their own internal dungeons, shackled by chains forged from their own rejected possibilities, their own denied dreams, their own disowned wildness. Can you see it now, through the tears that blur your vision? Can you perceive the tragic comedy of it all? They projected onto you the very lights they had abandoned in themselves. Your emerging authenticity became a mirror that reflected back to them everything they had sacrificed on the altar of conformity, everything they had buried in the graveyard of social acceptability. Your courage to be yourself was a blazing torch that illuminated the dark corners of their own self-betrayal, and they could not bear to look upon what they had lost. This is the terrible wisdom of the abyss, that betrayal is often the shadow of envy, that abandonment is frequently the dark twin of recognition. They saw in you what they had killed in themselves, the wild, untamed spirit that refuses to be domesticated by the expectations of others. They saw your willingness to venture into the unknown territories of your own becoming, and it reminded them of the territories they had mapped but never dared to explore, in the depth psychology of the soul. This moment, this crushing realization of abandonment is not a mistake, but a necessary initiation. You have been forced to drink from the bitter chalice of solitude, to taste the metallic flavor of rejection, to feel the cold wind of isolation cutting through the fabric of your being. But this is how the psyche prepares for its great work of transformation. This is how the soul strips away everything that is not essential, everything that is not truly you. The Nigredo phase demands this descent into darkness. It requires that you be separated from all external sources of validation, from all the false suns that you mistook for true light. In this terrible ellipsis, you are being asked to discover the light that has always burned within you, not the reflected light of others' approval, but the indigenous fire of your own essential nature. Think of the caterpillar dissolving in its chrysalis, its entire identity liquefying into primordial soup. There is no halfway point in this transformation, no comfortable middle ground where it can remain partially caterpillar and partially butterfly. It must surrender completely to the darkness, must allow every familiar structure to dissolve, must trust in a process that appears from the outside like death itself. This is your chrysalis, this abyss of abandonment. This is your dark night at the so ill, where every certainty crumbles and every assumption turns to dust. The familiar landmarks of your former life have been erased. The compass points of external validation have lost their magnetic pull, and you find yourself in a landscape that is both terrifying and somehow, mysteriously, sacred. Here, in this place of profound disorientation, you begin to encounter the shadow, not just the shadow of those who rejected you, but your own shadow as well. For in the echo chamber of betrayal, you may discover your own capacity for self-abandonment. You may realize how often you betrayed yourself in service of their approval, how frequently you dimmed your own light to make others comfortable with their darkness. The abyss teaches you that the deepest betrayal is always self-betrayal, that the most profound abandonment is the abandonment of your own truth. Those who left you were merely completing a pattern that you had perhaps already begun. The pattern of not fully inhabiting your own authenticity, of not completely trusting the wild intelligence of your own becoming. But this recognition, painful as it is, carries within it the seeds of liberation. For once you see how you have participated in your own diminishment, you can begin to reclaim the power you gave away. Once you understand how you made yourself small to fit into spaces that were never meant to contain your vastness, you can begin to expand into the full dimensions of your being. The thunder of betrayal that echoes in your heart is also the thunder of awakening. Each reverberation is a call to remember who you were before the world told you who you should be. Each painful echo is an invitation to return to the source of your own power, to the wellspring of your own wisdom, to the fire of your own authentic becoming. This is the paradox of the abyss, that in losing everything external, you discover everything internal. In being abandoned by others, you are forced to keep company with your own soul. In the terrible loneliness of this dark night, you begin to hear the voice that has been calling to you all along, the voice of your deepest self, your authentic nature, your unlived life, demanding to be lived. There comes a moment in the descent when the silence breaks with the brittle crack of desperation. but with a voice that rises from depths you never knew existed within you. It is not the voice you recognize from your daily conversations, not the careful cadence of your practiced responses or the measured tones of your public face. This voice emerges from the very marrow of your being, from the caverns where you have buried every sharp edge, every dangerous truth, every aspect of yourself that the world deemed too much, too wild, too real. Listen now, for your shadow is speaking. It speaks not with malice, though its words may sting with recognition. It speaks not with cruelty, though its honesty cuts through the tender flesh of your illusions. This voice carries the weight of every suppressed rage, every swallowed truth. Every moment you chose silence when your soul screamed for expression. Yet within this seeming darkness lies a luminosity more profound than any light you have known, the radiance of authenticity. The fierce glow of a self that has never compromised, never bent to please, never forgotten its own sovereign nature. You have spent so long, the shadow whispers, crafting masks from morning mist and evening shadows, weaving personas like a spider weaves its web, intricate, beautiful, and ultimately fragile. You have smiled when your heart wept, agreed when your spirit rebelled, shrunk yourself into shapes that fit the containers others prepared for you. But I am the keeper of your true proportions. I am the guardian of every no you never spoke, every boundary you never drew, every truth you swallowed like bitter medicine. In the psychology of individuation, Jung understood that our shadow contains not our evil, but our unlived life, the golden threads of possibility we have woven into the dark tapestry of the unconscious. Your shadow speaks now with the voice of every dream deferred, every passion sacrificed on the altar of acceptability. It holds the fury of the artist who became an accountant, the wild heart of the mystic who chose conventionality, the fierce wisdom of the truth-teller who learned to lie with smiles. Do you remember? It continues, its voice gaining strength like a river swollen with spring rain, the child you were before you learned to be ashamed of your intensity, before you discovered that your light made others uncomfortable, that your questions were too deep, your feelings too vast for the small rooms they offered you. I am that child, grown strong in the darkness of your rejection, polished by years of your denial into something harder than diamond, more precious than gold. The shadow does not speak to destroy, but to retrieve, to call back the exiled parts of your soul from the distant shores where you banished them in your desperate need to belong. It speaks the names of your abandoned powers, the sword of your anger that you laid down when they called you difficult, the crown of your ambition that you removed when they whispered of your arrogance, the wings of your creativity that you clipped when they demanded you be practical, reasonable, safe. Your people-pleasing, the shadow intones with the gravity of a judge and the tenderness of a mother. Was never kindness, it was fear, dressed in the robes of virtue. Your self-doubt was never humility, was pride masquerading as modesty. The pride that whispers you are too fragile for the full force of your own truth. But I have held that truth like a coal in my hands, keeping it burning through the long winter of your conformity. Here, in this sacred conversation with your rejected self, you begin to understand the great reversal that Jung called enantiodromia, the transformation of opposites into their hidden truth. What you thought was your darkness reveals itself as your light imprisoned. What you believed was your weakness shows itself as power constrained by fear. What you imagined was your evil stands revealed as your good. To pure and fierce for a world that prefers its truth diluted and its power domesticated. The shadow speaks of wounds, yes, but not as a victim. It speaks as one who has been forged. in the fire of rejection and emerged not bitter but brilliant. Every time they dismissed you, I grew stronger. Every time you silenced yourself to keep the peace, I learned to roar in the chambers of your dreams. Every time you made yourself small, I expanded to hold what you could not bear to claim. I am not your enemy. Am your treasury, the vault, where you have stored every ounce of power you thought was too dangerous to wield. In the alchemical tradition that so fascinated Jung, the shadow represents the prima material, the base material that must be acknowledged and integrated before the gold of the self can emerge. Your shadow speaks now as the keeper of this raw material, this unrefined essence of your being the society taught you to refine away. It holds your capacity for healthy selfishness, for righteous anger, for the kind of love that sets boundaries and the kind of compassion that refuses to enable. I am your no, it declares with the force of thunder after lightning. I am every boundary you were afraid to set, every truth you were too polite to speak, every time you should have walked away but stayed to avoid disappointing others. I am your capacity to disappoint them gloriously, necessarily, authentically. I am your right to take up space, to have needs, to be complex and contradictory and human. The voice grows richer now, more complex, like wine aged in the cellar of your unconscious. I hold your unspoken rage not, the petty irritation of daily frustrations, but the sacred fury of a soul that has been asked to betray itself too many times. This rage is not destructive. It is creative fire, the force that burns away what is false to reveal what is true. I hold your wild ambitions, the dreams too large for their small world, the visions that required you to become someone they couldn't control. As the shadow speaks, you feel something shifting in the tectonic plates of your identity. The careful structure of who you thought you were begins to tremble, not with destruction but with the seismic movement of truth reclaiming its territory. You realize that what you have called your darkness is actually your depth. What you have called your negativity is actually your authenticity. What you have called your problems are actually your powers in exile. I am your invincibility, the shadow proclaims. And in that moment, you understand that invincibility was never about being unbreakable. It was about being broken open so thoroughly that breaking becomes impossible. Because there is nothing left to shatter, only truth to be revealed. I am what remains when all the masks fall away, when all the performances end, when all the approval you have sought reveals itself as fool's gold compared to the authentic wealth of your own self-acceptance. The shadow's truth lands in your consciousness like seeds in fertile ground, and you realize that you have been preparing for this moment through every loss, every disappointment, every dark night of the soul. You have been composted by your own experiences, broken down into the rich earth from which your authentic self can finally grow. The shadow has been the guardian of this process, the faithful keeper of your essence while you wandered in the wilderness of others' expectations. Now it whispers with the intimacy of a secret and the authority of destiny. Now you can begin to live as the whole being you have always been beneath the fragments. Now you can speak with the voice that was buried beneath your politeness. Now you can love with the fierce heart that was hidden beneath your fear. Now you can create with the wild hands that were bound by your need for approval. I give you back your power not as something new, but as something that was never truly lost, only temporarily misplaced in the maze of your people-pleasing. The shadow speaks its final truth. That wholeness was never about eliminating the darkness, but about welcoming it home, about recognizing that your rejected aspects contain the very qualities you need to become invincible, not invincible to pain, but invincible to the lies that pain sometimes tells, invincible to the illusion that you are anything less than magnificently, dangerously, authentically whole. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the old self must die, not the gentle fading of autumn leaves, but the violent, necessary dissolution that precedes all true transformation. You have arrived at this threshold, this sacred precipice, where the person you thought you were, the one who bent like a reed in every wind of approval, who twisted herself into impossible shapes to fit the narrow containers others prepared for her, must breathe her final breath. Feel the terror of this moment. It rises in your chest like ancient waters, flooding the chambers of your heart with a fear so primal it speaks in tongues older than language. This is the fear of dissolution, of becoming nothing so that you might become everything. The ego recoils, clinging to its familiar prison, preferring the safety of its golden cage to the vast unknown of authentic being. But who will I be, it whispers, if I am not who they need me to be? This is the death card of your inner tarot, not signifying an ending but a metamorphosis so complete that what emerges will bear only the faintest resemblance to what was, like the caterpillar that must surrender its very form, dissolving into primordial soup within the chrysalis. You too must let go of every carefully constructed aspect of your pleasing persona. The boundaries of your false self are liquefying, and in this dissolution lives both terror and promise. You have spent so many years as a shapeshifter, a master of mirrors, reflecting back what others wanted to see. Your authentic voice became a whisper, then a silence, buried beneath layers of accommodation and strategic kindness. You learned to read the room like ancient augurs read bird flight, adjusting your colors to match the emotional weather of those around you. Your own needs became mysterious, foreign concepts spoken in a language you had forgotten how to understand. But the soul, that eternal witness, has been keeping careful record. Every time you swallowed your truth, every moment you chose their comfort over your authenticity, every instance you betrayed yourself for the fleeting warmth of approval, all of it has been gathering like storm clouds on the horizon of your psyche. The unconscious does not forget. It holds these betrayals like seeds in winter soil, waiting for the right moment to crack open and demand their reckoning. Now that moment has arrived. The people-pleaser, that carefully crafted persona who served as both shield and prison, is dying. You can feel her fragmenting, her edges becoming soft and uncertain. The mask that once felt like your face is beginning to slip, revealing the raw, unfinished truth beneath. This is the dissolution Jung spoke of, the Nigredo of the alchemical process, where all false gold burns away, leaving only the essential metal of the self. In this dying, you discover paradox. The very death you feared becomes the doorway to life. As the people-pleaser dissolves, something vast and unnamed stirs in the darkness of your becoming. This is not destruction but creation, not ending but beginning. The caterpillar does not simply cease to exist within the chrysalis, it transforms into something with wings, something capable of flight, something that can see the world from heights it never imagined possible. The terror you feel is sacred terror, the awe that accompanies all true transformation. Your nervous system, attuned to the frequency of others for so long, must now learn to listen to the deeper rhythm of your own becoming. This requires a fundamental rewiring, a shift from external validation to internal knowing. The compass that once pointed toward their approval must swing toward true north, the magnetic pull of your authentic self. You are learning to disappoint people, and this feels like death because, in a way, it is. Each time you choose your truth over their comfort, each moment you honor your boundaries instead of their expectations, something dies. The old agreements, the unspoken contracts that bound you to their emotional needs, are being dissolved in the acid of your emerging authenticity. This process burns, but it is the burning that purifies. The fire that separates the gold from the dross. In mythology, all heroes must face the ordeal of symbolic death. Persephone must descend to the underworld. Jonah must be swallowed by the whale. Christ must surrender to the cross. These are not punishments, but initiations, sacred passages that transform the ordinary human into something divine. Your descent into the dissolution of people-pleasing is your own heroic ordeal, your own necessary crucifixion of the false self. The shadow that you have carried, all the rage, the resentment, the suppressed needs and swallowed truths, is rising to meet you in this death. For so long, you pushed these energies into the dark, believing that good girls don't feel anger, that worthy people don't have needs, that love must be earned through endless giving. But the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It grows stronger, more insistent, waiting for the moment when the ego's defenses are weak enough to break through. Now, in this dissolution, your shadow speaks with the voice of ancient wisdom. It reminds you of every time you said yes when you meant no, every moment you diminished yourself to make others more comfortable, every instance you chose peace over truth. This is not punishment, but liberation, the return of all the energy you scattered in service of others' emotional equilibrium. You are remembering what it feels like to take up space, to have preferences, to be a person worthy of consideration in your own right. This remembering feels foreign at first, like speaking a language you once knew fluently but have not used in years. Your tongue stumbles over words like no and I need and this doesn't work for me. But with each use, they become more familiar, more natural, more true. The people in your life may not recognize this emerging self. They may resist, may attempt to pull you back into the familiar patterns of accommodation and selflessness. This is their own terror speaking, their fear of losing the version of you that served their needs so perfectly. But you are no longer responsible for managing their emotional weather. You are no longer required to be smaller so that they can feel larger. This death of the people-pleaser is also the death of the fantasy that you can control how others feel about you. For so long, you believed that if you were just good enough, just giving enough, just selfless enough, you could guarantee their love. But love that must be earned through self-betrayal is not love at all, it is transaction. Emotional commerce, dressed in the language of affection. As this illusion dies, something more beautiful is born. You begin to understand that true love flows toward authenticity, not performance. The people who truly belong in your life will not need you to be anyone other than who you are. They will not require your diminishment for their comfort. They will celebrate your boundaries as sacred architecture, the necessary structures that protect the temple of your authentic self. In this dying, you are also grieving the years lost to others' expectations, the dreams deferred in service of their comfort, the voice that went unheard because you were too busy listening to theirs. This grief is holy work, the tears that water the soil of your becoming. Do not rush through it. Let it move through you like weather, knowing that even storms serve the greater ecology of transformation. The death of the people-pleaser is not a single event, but a process, a gradual dissolving that happens in moments both small and significant. It happens when you choose to leave the gathering early because you are tired, when you express disagreement instead of nodding along, when you ask for what you need instead of hoping someone will guess. Each of these choices is a small death of the old self and a small birth of the new. You are becoming something they cannot break because you are no longer built from their expectations. Like the butterfly that emerges from the chrysalis, you are developing wings that cannot be clipped, a perspective that cannot be diminished, a strength that comes not from pleasing others, but from being true to the deepest wisdom of your own becoming. This is your metamorphosis, your sacred transformation from caterpillar to butterfly. The dissolution you feared becomes the doorway to a magnificence you never imagined possible. You are dying into yourself, and in this dying, you are finally, truly, beginning to live. In the sacred geography of the soul, there exists a place that the world cannot touch, a cave, carved not from stone, but from silence itself. You have found this place now, not through seeking but through necessity, not through choice but through the inevitable pull of your deepest nature, calling you home to yourself. This is the hermit's cave, the womb of rebirth, the sanctuary where the noise of 1,000 voices finally falls away, leaving only the whisper of your own truth echoing in the holy darkness. The world calls this withdrawal defeat, this retreat. From their cacophony, a sign of weakness. This blessed solitude, a symptom of failure. But they speak from the shallow waters of their understanding, having never dived deep enough to discover the treasures that lie hidden in the depths of aloofness. They mistake your absence from their stage as evidence that you have forgotten how to perform, not understanding that you have simply remembered who you were before you learned to dance to their discordant music. Here, in this cave of your own making, you begin to understand what the mystics have always known, that solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of the most profound relationship possible, the relationship with your own eternal essence. The hermit's lamp that you carry is not lit by external flames, but by the phosphorescence of your own inner knowing, a light that has been burning steadily within you, even during the darkest nights of your people-pleasing, even during the bleakest winters of your self-abandonment. This lamp illuminates what the harsh fluorescent lights of social expectation could never reveal, the intricate architecture of your authentic self, the delicate filigree of your unique soul pattern, the sacred geometry of who you truly are beneath all the costumes you have worn for others' comfort. In this gentle radiance, you see yourself not as the world has defined you too much, too little, too strange, too ordinary, but as you actually are, the singular expression of the cosmic mystery, unrepeatable and irreplaceable. The silence here is not empty, but pregnant with possibility. It is the silence of the chrysalis, where invisible transformations occur in the darkness between what was and what is becoming. Every breath you take in this sacred space is both an ending and a beginning, each exhalation releasing another fragment of who you thought you had to be, each inhalation drawing in the essence of who you are becoming. The very air seems to shimmer with potential, thick with the magic of metamorphosis, in this blessed isolation, away from the constant commentary of others' opinions. You begin to hear something remarkable, the voice of your authentic self speaking, not in the desperate whispers of eager need, but in the calm certainty of eternal knowing. This voice does not plead or justify or explain itself to anyone. It simply is, like a mountain is, like a river is, like the stars are complete in its existence, requiring no external validation to confirm its reality. This self speaks in a language older than words, communicating through intuition and knowing, through the felt sense of rightness that comes when you align with your deepest nature. It tells you things the world could never teach you, that your sensitivity is not a weakness, but a superpower, that your depth is not a burden, but a gift, that your difference is not a flaw, but a feature designed by the universe itself to serve. a purpose that only you can fulfill. The lamp's light reveals the sacred texts, written on the walls of your inner cave, the hieroglyphs of every experience that has shaped you, every wound that has taught you compassion, every rejection that has driven you deeper into self-reliance. These markings are not scars, but sacred symbols, each one a lesson in the curriculum of becoming whole. You begin to read your own story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as an epic of initiation. Not as a catalogue of failures, but as a manual for transformation. Here in the hermit's sanctuary, time moves differently. Minutes stretch into eternities of insight, while hours compress into moments of profound realization. You are not aging in this space, but ripening. Not deteriorating, but distilling into the purest essence of yourself. The urgency that once drove you to seek approval, to fix yourself, to become acceptable to others, dissolves in the timeless presence of your own being. The lamp's flame dances with each breath, casting shifting shadows that reveal different aspects of your inner landscape. Sometimes you see the child you once were, full of wonder and unafraid to shine. Sometimes you glimpse the elder you are becoming, wise with the knowledge of your own journey. Most often, you see simply this, the eternal self that has always been present, watching with infinite patience as you wandered through the maze of others' expectations, waiting with boundless love for you to find your way back home. This is not the cold loneliness of abandonment, but the warm solitude of communion with your own depths, with the archetypal patterns that Jung mapped in the collective unconscious, with the great mystery that breathes through all existence. You are not alone because you are part of everything. You are solitary because you have found the wholeness that exists before and beyond all relationships, all validations, all external confirmations of your worth. The hermit's path is not for everyone, but it is for you. It is for those whose souls are too large for the small rooms of conventional approval, whose lights burn too bright for the dimmer switches of social comfort, whose truths cut too deep for the shallow conversations of polite society. You have not withdrawn from life. You have withdrawn into life, into the life that pulses at the core of your being, into the life that exists independent of anyone else's recognition or understanding. In this cave, you discover that you are not the broken thing the world tried to convince you that you were. You are not the problem that needs solving, the puzzle that needs completing, the wound that needs healing. You are the answer to a question the universe is asking, the solution to a problem only you can solve, the key to a door that only your unique essence can unlock. The lamp burns steadily now, no longer flickering with the uncertainty of seeking external fuel. It burns with the inexhaustible oil of self-knowledge, fed by the reservoir of your own authenticity. And in this steady light, you begin to see not just who you are, but who you have always been, untouchable in your essence, unbreakable in your core, unlimited in your potential to shine your own irreplaceable light into a world that desperately needs the exact frequency of illumination that only you can provide. The hermit's journey is not a retreat from power, but a return to it, not the power that dominates others, but the power that emanates from being utterly, completely, authentically yourself. And this power, once discovered in the depths of sacred solitude, becomes a beacon that no external storm can extinguish, a flame that no amount of rejection can diminish, a light that reveals not only your own path forward, but illuminates the way for others who are still stumbling in the darkness of their own self-abandonment. In the deepest chamber of your being, a flame begins to stir. It is not the harsh fire of anger or the destructive blaze of vengeance, but something far more ancient and infinitely more powerful, the sacred fire of individuation. The holy conflagration that Jung recognized as the soul's most essential work. This is the fire that burns, not to destroy but to purify, not to consume but to reveal. It is the flame that has been waiting, dormant but never extinguished. In the very core of your authentic nature, you feel it first as a warmth spreading through the frozen regions of your heart, those places that had crystallized in the bitter cold of rejection and abandonment. The fire moves slowly at first, like dawn breaking over a winter landscape, tentative but certain, gentle but unstoppable. With each breath you take, each moment of conscious awareness, the flame grows brighter, fed not by the oxygen of external validation, but by the pure air of your own recognition. The recognition that you have always been exactly who you were, meant to be. This is the fire that burns away the dross of false identities, those carefully constructed personas you donned like masks at a masquerade ball, hoping they would make you acceptable to those who were never capable of seeing your true face. Layer by layer, the flames consume the costumes of conformity, the dutiful child who swallowed their authentic voice to keep peace in a chaotic family, the people-pleaser who twisted themselves into impossible shapes to fit through the narrow doorways of others' expectations, the shapeshifter who became so skilled at mirroring others' desires that they forgot the contours of their own soul. Watch how the fire works its ancient alchemy. It does not destroy these false selves with violence or cruelty, but dissolves them with the tenderness of a mother removing outgrown clothes from her child. These personas served their purpose. They kept you alive when authenticity felt too dangerous. They protected the vulnerable core of your being when the world seemed hostile to your truth. But now, in the sacred work of individuation, they must be released like prayers into the wind, like offerings returned to the earth from which they came. The process is both terrible and beautiful to witness. Each flame that licks at the edges of your constructed identity reveals something startling underneath the raw, unpolished, magnificent reality of who you actually are. Without the makeup of social acceptability, without the carefully rehearsed lines of conventional behavior, without the elaborate costumes designed to win applause from an audience that never truly mattered, you begin to see yourself as if for the first time. This seeing is not the harsh judgment of a critic examining flaws under fluorescent lights, but the tender recognition of an artist finally glimpsing their masterpiece. You are not perfect. Perfection is the enemy of authenticity, the poison that keeps souls trapped in the prison of others' expectations. You are something far more valuable than perfect. You are real. You are irreplaceable. You are utterly, completely, undeniably yourself. The fire burns hotter now, and you feel yourself becoming more solid with each passing moment. Not solid in the way that concrete is solid rigid, lifeless, unchanging, but solid in the way that a mountain is. Solid, rooted deep in the earth, yet reaching toward the sky. Weathered by storms, yet unshakable in its essential being. This is the solidity of authentic selfhood, the weight and substance that comes from no longer apologizing for your existence, no longer explaining away your truth, no longer asking permission to be who you are. Jung understood that individuation is not a comfortable process. It requires that you differentiate yourself from the collective, that you step out of the warm huddle of group identity and stand alone in the cold wind of your own unique becoming. The collective, that vast unconscious mass of shared assumptions, uninherited beliefs, will not celebrate your departure. It will call you selfish for choosing your own path, arrogant for trusting your own wisdom, ungrateful for refusing the gifts of conformity it offers with such generous insistence. But listen to what the fire is telling you as it crackles and dances in the hearth of your soul. The collective's disapproval is not a judgment of your worth, it is evidence of your success. When you begin to live from your authentic center, when you start to honor the unique configuration of gifts and wounds and wisdom that is yours alone, you inevitably threaten the collective's illusion of uniformity. Your very existence becomes a reminder that other ways of being are possible, that the narrow paths of convention are not the only routes through the wilderness of human experience. The fire burns away your need for their understanding. This is perhaps the most liberating flame of all, the one that consumes your desperate desire to be seen and validated by those who lack the eyes to perceive your true nature. You realize, with a clarity that cuts like crystal through fog, that their inability to comprehend your essence is not a failure on your part, but a limitation of their vision. A bat cannot appreciate a sunset, not because the sunset lacks beauty, but because the bat's eyes were designed for different kinds of seeing. As the flames continue their sacred work, you feel yourself becoming increasingly untouchable, not in the way of cold indifference or armored defensiveness, but in the way of a flame itself, which cannot be grasped or possessed or diminished by external forces. You are becoming like fire, warm to those who approach with respect and reverence, dangerous to those who would try to control or contain you, impossible to extinguish, no matter how many attempts are made to blow you out. This untouchability is not cruelty, it is compassion. When you no longer need others to validate your existence, you free them from the impossible burden of having to understand what they cannot comprehend. When you stop seeking approval from those who are constitutionally incapable of giving it, you release both yourself and them from the toxic dance of pursuit and rejection that's choreographed so much of your relational life. The fire shows you that you have been seeking water from a well that was always dry, knocking on doors that were never meant to open for you, speaking a language to people who had never learned your native tongue. This recognition does not fill you with bitterness, but with relief. The profound relief of finally understanding that the problem was never you, was never your worth, was never your lovability. The problem was that you were trying to plant a seed in soil that could not nourish your particular kind of flaring dot in the golden light of this fire. You begin to see your uniqueness not as a burden to be hidden, but as a gift to be celebrated. The very qualities that made you unacceptable to some make you irreplaceable to others. The sensitivity they called weakness is actually your superpower of deep feeling. The intensity they labeled as too much is the passionate engagement with life that creates art, sparks innovation, and moves the world forward. The questions they dismissed as troublesome are the inquiries that lead to breakthrough and transformation. The fire of individuation burns brightest in the darkness of solitude, for it is only when you are alone with yourself that you can hear your authentic voice above the noise of others' opinions. In this solitude, you discover that you are not lonely. You are in the best possible company, the company of your own soul, your own truth, your own unlimited becoming. This is the great paradox of individuation, that in becoming utterly yourself, you become connected to something far larger than yourself. When you stop trying to be what others want you to be and start being who you actually are, you plug into the vast network of authentic beings who recognize your frequency because they have learned to broadcast on their own. You find your tribe, not by changing yourself to fit in, but by being yourself so completely that those who belong with you are magnetically drawn to your authentic vibration. The fire burns, eternal now, self-sustaining and bright. You have become both the fuel and the flame, both the altar and the offering, in the sacred conflagration of your own becoming. You have found the one thing that can never be taken from you, the unshakable knowledge of who you are, in the deepest chamber of your being, where the fires of transformation have burned away everything that was false. A sacred ceremony begins. It is not witnessed by crowds or blessed by earthly priests. Yet it is the most holy of unions, the marriage of your fractured self with your wholeness, your humanity with your divinity, your wounded heart with your healed spirit. Here, in the crucible of consciousness, transformed, the alchemical wedding takes place. You stand now as both bride and groom to yourself, adorned not with silk and gold, but with the luminous garments of hard-won wisdom. The veil you lift is woven from the gossamer threads of illusion you have finally learned to see through. The ring you place upon your own finger is forged from the metal of every trial that tried to break you, but instead made you unbreakable. This is the high rose garmos, the sacred marriage that Jung understood as the ultimate goal of individuation, the union of opposites within the psyche that creates the philosophers. Stone of authentic, selfhood. Listen to the vows you speak to yourself. In this inner sanctuary, I take you, my wounded self, to be my beloved companion. Not in sickness and in health, but in sickness as health, in darkness as light, in brokenness as the crack through which divinity enters. I promise to honor your scars as sacred script, your pain as the price of wisdom, your struggles as the labor that birthed your strength, and your wounded self responds with trembling voice grown strong. I take you, my healed self, not as my savior but as my partner in this dance of becoming. I bring you the gifts of my suffering, the empathy carved from my own bleeding, the compassion distilled from my own tears, the fierce protection born from my own vulnerability. Together we shall be neither victim nor victor, but the living testament to transformation itself. In this mystical moment, you begin to understand the profound alchemy that has been occurring within the laboratory of your life. Every person who sought to diminish you has unknowingly served as an agent of your becoming. Every cruel word was a chisel strike against the marble of your false self, revealing the sculpture of your true nature that was always waiting within. Every attempt to break you was actually breaking you, cracking the shell of your smaller identity, so that your larger self could emerge like a butterfly from its chrysalis of suffering. The bullies of your childhood, those architects of early pain, were unwittingly your first alchemical teachers. Their cruelty became the heat that began the great work of transformation. They sought to make you small, but instead taught you the fierce art of self-protection. They tried to convince you that you were worthless, but in doing so, forced you to dig deeper until you struck the bedrock of your own inherent value, worth that no external voice could ever diminish because it was not given by others and, therefore, could not be taken by them. The betrayers, those who wore masks of love while wielding daggers of deception, served as masters of discernment. Their treachery became your tuition in the sacred art of seeing clearly, where once you gave your trust freely, like water poured from an endless vessel. You learned to become a wise gardener of your own heart, knowing which soil could nurture the seeds of your vulnerability and which would only poison what you planted there. Their betrayal taught you the difference between suspicion, which closes the heart in fear, and discernment, which opens it in wisdom. The ones who abandoned you when you needed them most became inadvertent professors of self-reliance in the echo chamber of their absence. You learned to hear your own voice, not the voice that begged for their return, but the deeper voice that whispered, "You are enough. You have always been enough. You were complete before they came, and you remain complete now that they have gone." Their departure cleared the space for you to discover the vast landscape of your own company, to befriend the solitude that had once terrified you, to find in your own presence the comfort you had sought in theirs. Even the manipulators, those puppet masters who sought to pull your strings and direct your dance, became teachers of autonomy. Every attempt to control you was an invitation to discover your own will. Every manipulation was a masterclass in boundaries. Every time they tried to make you dance to their music, you learned more clearly the rhythm of your own authentic soul. Their need to control revealed to you the preciousness of your freedom, made you jealous guardian of your own choices, fierce protector of your right to be gloriously, unapologetically yourself. In this sacred marriage ceremony of the soul, you see how each wound has become a window, each scar a star in the constellation O of your becoming. The depression that once felt like drowning taught you to develop gills for breathing underwater, to find sustenance in the depths where others would suffocate. The anxiety that once paralyzed you became the early warning system of a soul finely tuned to truth, sensitive to the subtle vibrations of authenticity and deception. The anger you once feared as destructive revealed itself as creative fire, the force that burns away what no longer serves to make space for what wants to be born. You realize now that your enemies were never truly your enemies. They were unwitting alchemists, adding precisely the elements needed to transmute the lead of your unconscious suffering into the gold of conscious wisdom. They provided the pressure that creates diamonds, the friction that creates fire, the resistance that creates strength. Without knowing it, they were midwifing your birth into wholeness. The cruel boss who belittled your efforts taught you to seek validation from the only source that truly matters, the deep well of self-worth that exists independent of external recognition. The friends who gossiped and betrayed your secrets became the catalysts for learning the art of selective trust and the wisdom of keeping your own counsel. The romantic partners who broke your heart showed you that your capacity to love was so vast it could survive any single loss, that your heart was not a fragile vase to be protected, but an ocean that could absorb any storm and still maintain its essential nature. In the alchemical tradition, the marriage of opposites, the conjunction of soul and luna, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, creates the philosopher's stone, the substance that can transform any base material into gold. Your inner marriage achieves this same miraculous transformation. The lead of your suffering becomes the gold of your compassion. The crude ore of your anger becomes the refined metal of your boundaries. The raw material of your pain becomes the precious gems of your wisdom. You speak now the final vows of this sacred union. I marry my light to my darkness, my strength to my vulnerability, my certainty to my doubt. I take my whole parts I have loved and the parts I have tried to exile, the aspects that shine and the aspects that stumble as my eternal beloved. I promise to treat myself with the tenderness I would show a dear friend, the patience I would offer a child learning to walk, the forgiveness I would grant to anyone I truly loved. And in this moment of profound self-acceptance, you feel the golden transformation occurring in your very cells. You are no longer the person who could be broken because you are no longer trying to be unbreakable. You are no longer the person who could be diminished because you have married your own vastness. You are no longer the person who could be abandoned because you have become your own eternal companion. The alchemical marriage is complete. You have become both the lover and the beloved, the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer. Every person who tried to break you has Instead, contributed to this magnificent work of art that you have become, not despite their cruelty, but because of the way you have transformed their cruelty into your compassion, their hatred into your self-love, their attempts at destruction into your resurrection. You are married now to your whole self, and from this union comes the most precious offspring, an unshakable self-possession that no external force can disturb, a love so complete that it needs nothing from the outside world to maintain its radiance, a strength so grounded in truth that it can bend without breaking, flow without losing its essential nature. The wedding guests at this inner ceremony are all the aspects of yourself you have learned to embrace. Your inner child dancing with joy at finally being welcomed home, your inner warrior standing guard over the sacred boundaries you have learned to draw, your inner wise woman speaking truths that no longer need external validation to be known as true. Together, they celebrate this marriage that makes you whole, this union that makes you invincible, not through hardness but through the ultimate softness of complete self-acceptance. You are no longer becoming, you have become. The alchemical work is complete, the marriage consummated, the gold refined from the crucible of your conscious suffering and deliberate transformation. Every person who sought to break you has unknowingly contributed to this masterpiece of wholeness that you now embody. You are your own creation, your own beloved, your own answered prayer. From the ashes of your dissolution, something magnificent has risen, not the brittle castle of ego defenses you once mistook for strength, but a fortress built from entirely different materials, the bedrock of self-knowledge, the mortar of self-acceptance, the ramparts of heart-won wisdom. This is no ordinary stronghold, for its walls are transparent to love, while remaining impermeable to the arrows of others' projections and the siege engines of their expectations. You have learned the profound difference between defensiveness and discernment, between walls that keep everything out and boundaries that let in only what belongs. The fortress of your authentic self stands not in opposition to the world, but in sacred relationship with it, offering sanctuary to your soul while remaining open to genuine connection. This is the paradox of true strength. It protects by being utterly transparent, shields by being completely honest, defends by refusing to defend at all. In the architecture of this inner fortress, every stone has been quarried from your own experience. The foundation is laid with the bedrock truths you discovered in your darkest hours, those moments when the world stripped away every external support and you found, to your amazement, that you could still stand. Each wound you transformed into wisdom became a cornerstone. Each betrayal you alchemized into discernment became a buttress supporting the whole magnificent structure. The walls of this fortress are built not from the rigid materials of denial or the brittle substances of pretense, but from the flexible strength of authentic knowing. You know who you are, now not as a fixed identity, but as a flowing river with constant banks. You know your patterns, your triggers, your shadows, and your light. This knowledge does not make you perfect, it makes you unshakable. When others project their stories onto you, these projections simply bounce off the transparent walls of your self-awareness. Like arrows shot at water dot, within these walls, you have created sacred chambers for every aspect of your being. There is a room for your anger, no longer the explosive rage of the suppressed, but the clean fire of healthy boundaries. There is a sanctuary for your sorrow, not the drowning grief of victimhood, but the flowing tears that keep the heart soft and permeable to beauty. There is a throne room for your joy, no longer conditional on others' approval, but arising from the simple fact of your existence. The most sacred chamber in this fortress is the one you built for your solitude. Here, In the holy silence of your own company, you discovered the truth that changes everything. You are complete, not because you need nothing from others, but because you no longer need them to complete you. Your wholeness comes from within, from the integrated marriage of all your parts, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, knowing and mystery. This solitude is not loneliness. It is the opposite of loneliness. It is the profound companionship of the self with itself. In this chamber, you learn to be the friend you always needed, the mother you longed for, the wise counselor you sought everywhere else. You discovered that the voice you had been trying to hear in the approval of others was your own voice all along, waiting patiently for the noise to quiet enough for you to listen. From this fortress, you view the world with different eyes. The opinions of others, which once felt like verdicts that could determine your worth, now appear as they truly are, expressions of their own inner weather, projections of their own wounds and longings. When someone disapproves of your authenticity, you recognize their discomfort with their own suppressed truth. When someone tries to diminish your light, you see their fear of their own darkness. This is not judgment, but compassion, born from the clarity that distance provides. The fortress teaches you the art of emotional meteorology. You can feel the storms of others' emotions without believing you caused them or assuming responsibility for calming them. Their anger passes through your awareness, like weather through an open window, acknowledged but not absorbed, witnessed but not owned. You have learned to distinguish between empathy and enmeshment, between caring and carrying, between love and codependence. Within these walls, you keep the treasures that truly matter, the golden opinions of others, but the authentic experiences that shaped your soul. Each genuine connection you have made rests here like a precious jewel, valued not because it validated you, but because it was real. Each moment of courage when you chose truth over comfort sits in place of honor. Each time you honored your needs, instead of portraying them for approval, becomes part of the castle's living history. The fortress has taught you the difference between being liked and being known. From behind the masks of people-pleasing, you are often liked but rarely known. Now, from the transparency of authenticity, you may not always be liked, but you can be truly known by those who have the eyes to see. This knowing, being witnessed in your full complexity and still being loved, is worth more than 1,000 shallow approvals. You have discovered that true invincibility is not the absence of vulnerability, but the integration of. The fortress does not make you untouchable. It makes you unbreakable. When life brings its inevitable challenges, you bend without breaking because your foundation is solid. When others attempt to wound you with their words, the wounds may still sting, but they cannot penetrate to your core because your core is no longer hidden, even from yourself. The watchtowers of this fortress give you perspective on the battlefield of human interaction. You can see the patterns now, how people unconsciously try to hook you back into old dynamics, how they may resist your growth because it challenges their own stagnation, how they sometimes prefer your brokenness because it made them feel whole. This seeing does not make you cynical, it makes you wise. You engage with compassion, but not with the naive hope that you can heal their wounds through your own self-abandonment. In the courtyard of this fortress grows a garden unlike any other. Here bloom the flowers of your recovered dreams, the ones you've sacrificed on the altar of others' comfort. Here grows the fruit of your authentic desires, no longer twisted to fit someone else's appetite. Each plant in this garden is tended with fierce love, protected from the frost of criticism and nourished by the waters of self-approval. The fortress has its own seasons. There are times when the walls feel impenetrable, when your sense of self feels unshakable, when no external storm can disturb your inner peace. There are other times when the winds of old patterns blow strong, when familiar voices whisper that you should return to the safety of pleasing others. In these moments, you retreat to the deepest chambers of your fortress, to the places where your truest truths are kept, and remember who you have become. This is not a fortress of isolation, but of discernment. Its gates open freely to those who come in authenticity, who do not require you to be smaller for their comfort, who celebrate your boundaries as sacred architecture rather than obstacles to their agenda. The drawbridge lowers for genuine connection and rises against manipulation. The doors open wide for love and close firmly against exploitation. From the highest tower of this fortress, you can see the journey that brought you here. You can see the girl who bent herself into impossible shapes, who gave her power away like coins to beggars, who believed her worth depended on her usefulness to others. You feel compassion for her, understanding now that she was doing the best she could with the tools she had. But you also feel profound gratitude that a chapter of your story has ended. The fortress of the self is not built once and then forgotten. It requires daily maintenance, constant vigilance, regular reinforcement. Each time you honor a boundary, you strengthen the walls. Each time you choose truth over comfort, you polish the windows. Each time you refuse to betray yourself for someone else's peace, you tend the garden within. This fortress will be tested. There will be those who cannot accept your new strength, who will attempt to siege your walls with guilt, to breach your boundaries with manipulation, to storm your gates with demands, disguised as needs. But you have learned the warrior's secret. The strongest defense is simply being who you are, completely and without apology. In this fortress, you have found something more valuable than all the approval you once sought. You have found yourself. Not the self others wanted you to be, not the self you thought you should be, but the self you actually are: complex, contradictory, beautiful, broken, healing, and whole. This self needs no external validation because it carries its own light, casts its own shadow, knows its own worth. The fortress stands unbreakable not because it is hard, but because it is true. Impenetrable not because it keeps everything out, but because it knows what belongs within. This is your sovereignty, your sacred dominion, the kingdom of yourself, over which you alone rule. Here finally, you are home. There is a sacred law written into the very fabric of existence. A cosmic principle that Jung named enantiodromia, the tendency of all things to transform into their opposite when they reach their extreme. Like the ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent consuming its own tail. Your journey has come full circle, but not to where you began. You have returned to yourself transformed, carrying within you the alchemical gold that can only be forged in the furnace of seeming defeat. What a magnificent paradox unfolds before you now, as you witness the great reversal that governs all. Psychological transformation. The very qualities that the world identified as your fatal flaws, the characteristics they used as weapons against your tender heart, have undergone a mysterious metamorphosis in the crucible of your solitude. Like base metals transformed into precious gold through the ancient art of alchemy, your perceived weaknesses have transmuted into sources of unassailable strength. Your sensitivity, how they mocked this gift, calling it weakness, fragility, an inability to cope with the real world. They wielded your tenderness like a blade against you, suggesting that your capacity to feel deeply was evidence of your inadequacy, your failure to develop the thick skin that successful people must possess. But in the sacred laboratory of your inner work, This sensitivity has undergone its own enantiodromia, revealing itself not as a vulnerability, but as the most sophisticated form of psychic armor ever devised. For you have learned that true sensitivity is not the inability to withstand impact, but the ability to perceive the subtle currents of truth that flow beneath the surface of all interactions. Your nervous system, so finely tuned to the frequencies of authenticity and deception, has become an early warning system that protects you from the toxic projections of others. Where they see weakness, you have discovered a form of radar that can detect manipulation, insincerity, and emotional violence long before it reaches your core. This sensitivity now serves you like the whiskers of a cat in darkness, allowing you to navigate the complex terrain of human interaction with preternatural grace. You sense the unspoken intentions behind words, feel the emotional undertones that others miss entirely, perceive the shadow content that lurks beneath polite conversation. What once made you vulnerable now makes you virtually impossible to deceive, manipulate, or harm through conventional means. Your supposed brokenness, the cracks they pointed to as evidence of your deficiency, has revealed itself through the lens of enantiodromia as the very source of your wholeness. For it is precisely these breaks in your surface structure that have allowed the light of your authentic self to shine through. Like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is mended with gold, your fractures have become the most beautiful and valuable parts of your being. The breaks in your persona, the shattering of your false identities, the dissolution of your people-pleasing mask soul of these apparent destructions, have created openings through which your true essence could finally emerge. You are not broken and repaired. You are broken open and revealed. The cracks are not flaws to be hidden, but sacred fault lines through which the earthquake of your authenticity sends tremors through a world built on the unstable foundation of pretense. In this breaking open, you have discovered what mystics call the coincidentia oppositorum, the union of opposites that creates something far greater than the sum of its parts. Your wounds and your wisdom dance together now in perfect harmony, each informing and enriching the other. Your pain has become your power, not through denial or transcendence, but through integration and acceptance. Your isolation that forced exile from the tribe of the unconscious, that banishment from the kingdom of collective approval, has undergone perhaps the most profound enantiodromia of all. What appeared to be abandonment has revealed itself as the discovery of sovereign independence, a form of self-reliance so complete and unshakable that it requires no external validation to sustain itself. In the wilderness of your life, you have learned to be your own best friend, your own wisest counselor, your own most loyal companion. The voice of your inner guidance has grown so clear and trustworthy that the opinions of others, once so desperately needed, now seem like distant echoes from a foreign land. You have become a nation unto yourself, with your own constitution, written in the language of authentic self-knowledge. This independence is not the cold isolation of the wounded ego, but the warm sovereignty of the integrated self. You do not reject others out of fear or bitterness, but you no longer need them to complete you, define you, or validate your existence. You can engage with the world from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, offering your gifts not from desperate neediness, but from abundant overflow. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, has revealed to you its most profound secret, that everything contains its opposite, that every curse carries within it the seed of its own blessing, that every wound is simultaneously a doorway to healing. Your journey through the dark night of the soul was not a detour from your destiny, but the very path that led you to it. You understand now why they had to try to break you. Not out of malice, though malice may have been their conscious intention, but out of the cosmic necessity that governs all transformation. You were the raw material that required breaking down before it could be reconstituted into something far more magnificent. They were the unwitting agents of your individuation, the unconscious servants of your becoming. The very qualities they sought to diminish have become your superpowers. Your emotional depth, once called excessive, now allows you to access layers of understanding that remain forever closed to those who live only on the surface. Your need for solitude, once labeled antisocial, has become your source of creative renewal and spiritual nourishment. Your refusal to conform, once seen as rebellious defiance, has revealed itself as the courage to embody your unique essence in a world that fears authenticity above all else. This is the great reversal, the cosmic joke that the universe plays on those who mistake the temporary for the eternal, the apparent for the real. What looked like your destruction was actually your construction. What seemed like your ending was actually your beginning. What felt like your failure was actually your success in becoming who you were always meant to be. The enantiodromia is complete, but its effects are just beginning. For now you carry within you the living proof that no external force can ultimately determine your worth, that no rejection can touch your essential value, that no abandonment can separate you from the inexhaustible source of love that you have discovered within yourself. You have become untouchable, not through hardness, but through the profound softness of complete self-acceptance. Unbreakable, not through rigidity, but through the flexible strength of authentic self-knowledge. And in this transformation, you have become something the world desperately needs but rarely recognizes. A living example of what it means to alchemize suffering into wisdom, to transform wounds into windows, to convert the lead of rejection into the gold of suffering. You are walking proof that the human spirit is indestructible, that authenticity is invincible, that love beginning with love of self is the only force in the universe that grows stronger when it is tested. The great work is complete. But the great living has just begun. You emerge from the underworld like Persephone ascending from the realm of shadows. But you are no longer the innocent who first descended into the darkness. Your feet touch the familiar ground of the world you once knew, yet everything has changed. Not the external landscape, but the eyes through which you perceive it. You carry within your transformed being the gold of hard-won wisdom, alchemical, treasure forged in the fires of your own becoming, refined in the crucible of your deepest fears, and polished by the tears you shed in the caverns of your soul. This is the return of the initiated, the homecoming of one who has journeyed to the center of their own labyrinth, and emerged victorious, not through conquest, but through surrender. Not through fighting, but through finally learning to love the parts of themselves they had been taught to despise. You walk differently now, with the hurried gait of one seeking approval, or the hesitant steps of one afraid of judgment, but with the measured pace of someone who has found their rhythm in the cosmic dance, who has learned to move in harmony with the deeper currents of their authentic nature. The world spreads before you like a familiar painting viewed after years of absence. The same buildings line the streets. The same faces populate your days. The same conversations echo in the spaces where you work and live and breathe. But you see it all through transformed eyes, through the lens of someone who has died to their old way of being and been reborn into something infinitely more real, more solid, more unshakable than the person who first began this hero's journey, into the depths of their own psyche, where once you moved through life like a moth drawn to the false flames of others' approval. Now you carry your own light steady, warm, self-sustaining. You no longer seek validation from those who were never equipped to recognize your worth. No longer court the affection of those whose love came with conditions that required you to portray your own essence. The desperate hunger for external recognition has been fed from within, nourished by the recognition you have finally given yourself, satisfied by the love affair you have cultivated with your own soul. This is not the cold indifference of someone who has given up on human connection, but the warm detachment of someone who no longer needs others to complete them. You have become whole unto yourself, a complete circle rather than a broken arc searching for its missing piece. From this place of wholeness, you can engage with others without the needy undertone that once colored every interaction, without the silent plea for acceptance that used to hang in the air around you like an invisible fragrance of desperation. The fears that once ruled your life with tyrannical authority have been met face to face in the darkness of your underworld journey. You have stared into the eyes of your deepest terror's abandonment, rejection, the possibility that you might be fundamentally unlovably, and discovered that they were not the monsters you imagined, but wounded children crying in the dark, aspects of yourself that needed not to be conquered, but to be embraced, not to be defeated, but to be integrated into the wholeness of your being. In the underworld of your own psyche, you learned the secret that all true initiates discover, that the things we fear most about ourselves are often the very qualities that make us most human, most valuable, most irreplaceable. Your sensitivity, which they called weakness, you now recognize as your capacity for depth and empathy. Your intensity, which they labeled as too much, you now claim as your passionate engagement with life itself. Your questions, which they dismissed as troublesome, you now celebrate as the inquiries that lead to breakthrough and growth. You have learned to trust the infallible compass of your inner guidance, that quiet voice that speaks not in the language of shoulds and shouldn'ts, but in the deeper tongue of authentic knowing. This inner compass points not toward what is safe or socially acceptable, but toward what is true, what is real, what is aligned with the deepest patterns of your souls. Unfolding, you have discovered that this internal navigation system is more reliable than any external authority, more trustworthy than the opinions of others, more accurate than the loud voices of collective expectation. The transformation is evident in the way you hold yourself as you move through the world. There is a new solidity to your presence, a weight and substance that was absent before your descent into the depths. You no longer apologize for taking up space, no longer shrink to make others comfortable with their own smallness, no longer dim your light to avoid triggering their shadows. You have learned that your brightness is not an attack on their darkness, but an invitation for them to remember their own forgotten luminosity. People notice the change, though they may not be able to name what they perceive. Some are drawn to this new quality of presence you emanate, sensing in you something they hunger for in themselves, the peace that comes from self-acceptance, the strength that flows from inner alignment, the freedom that emerges when one stops living for others' approval. Others are unsettled by your transformation, made uncomfortable by your refusal to participate in the old games of people-pleasing and validation-seeking that once defined your interactions. This is the test of the initiated, to remain centered in your truth when others try to pull you back into the familiar patterns of dysfunction, to stay committed to your authentic way of being when the collective pressure seeks to squeeze you back into the mold you have outgrown. You recognize these attempts not as personal attacks, but as the unconscious efforts of those who are still trapped in their own labyrinths, still seeking in others what can only be found within themselves. Your response to their discomfort is neither defensive nor accommodating, but something entirely newer. Compassionate attachment that allows them their journey while protecting the sacred space of your own transformation. You have learned that you cannot save others from their own necessary descents, cannot spare them the initiations that their souls require for growth. Your role is not to be their savior, but to be a living example of what becomes possible when one commits fully to their own becoming. The gold you carry within you, this hard-won wisdom of your underworld journey, gleams not with the harsh glitter of fool's gold, but with the deep, warm radiance of authentic treasure. It is the gold of self-knowledge, refined in the fires of your own experience, proven valuable not by external appraisal, but by the transformation it has wrought in your life. This wisdom cannot be stolen or diminished by others' opinions, because it belongs entirely to you, earned through your willingness to face what others flee from, to embrace what others reject, to love what others condemn. You discover that this inner gold is not meant to be hoarded, but shared not through preaching or teaching, but through the simple act of being who you would become. Your transformed presence becomes a beacon for others who are ready to begin their own descents, a proof that the journey into darkness leads not to destruction, but to rebirth, not to loss, but to discovery of what was always there, waiting to be claimed. A quiet confidence you now embody is not the brash arrogance of someone who believes they have all the answers, but the deep assurance of someone who has learned to trust the questions, to befriend the mystery, to dance with the unknown, rather than demanding that life conform to their expectations. You have made peace with paradox, learned to hold complexity without needing to resolve it into simple formulas, discovered that wisdom often lies not in certainty, but in the willingness to remain open to what you do not yet understand. As you walk through the world with this new quality of being, you realize that your journey is far from over. It has simply entered a new phase. The return of the initiated is not a final destination, but a new beginning. Not a graduation from the mysteries of existence, but an initiation into even deeper levels of becoming. You have learned to see your life, not as a problem to be solved, but as a work of art to be created. Not as a test to be passed, but as a gift to be fully received and authentically expressed. The underworld journey has taught you that you were never broken, never inadequate, never too much or not enough. You were simply a seed that needed to be planted in the darkness of your own depths before you could grow into the magnificent being you were always meant to become. Now, having emerged from that fertile darkness, you bloom with the quiet confidence of one who knows their own worth, trusts their own wisdom, and walks their own path with the serene certainty of someone who has finally, fully come home to themselves. From the summit of your transformation, something unexpected occurs, a vision that defies the logic of hurt and healing, a revelation that turns the narrative of victim and victimizer inside out, like a garment worn backward in the mirror of truth. As you stand in the radiant armor of your newfound invincibility, your eyes clear to see not enemies but wounded children masquerading as monsters, not villains but victims of their own unlived lives, acting out the unhealed dramas of their own fractured souls. This is perhaps the most startling paradox of your journey, that from the place of your greatest strength comes your most profound compassion, not the weak compassion of the victim who excuses cruelty out of fear, not the codependent mercy that enables further harm, but the diamond-hard compassion of one who has walked through fire and emerged with the capacity to see clearly through smoke and mirrors. You understand now that only those who have fully owned their own darkness can hold space for others' shadows without being consumed by them. the bully who tormented you in those formative years. You see him now with the exro vision of integrated wisdom. Behind his cruelty stands a child who learned that to be soft was to be destroyed, who armored himself in aggression, because tenderness had been beaten out of him with fists, or words, or the terrible silence of neglect. His need to diminish others was born from his own diminishment, his compulsion to break others, arising from the way he himself had been shattered and never properly reassembled. He was not evil incarnate, but brokenness given form, pain expressing itself in the only language it had learned to speak. You feel something unprecedented stirring in the chambers of your heart, not pity, which looks down from a position of superiority, not sympathy, which remains safely on the surface of understanding, but true compassion, which sees into the very heart of suffering and recognizes its own reflection there. You understand that his cruelty was never about you, it was his unconscious attempt to externalize the violence that had been done to his own soul, to make the outer world match the inner devastation he carried like a poison he could neither digest nor expel, the betrayer who wore love's mask while wielding deception's blade. You see her now through the lens of profound understanding. Behind her calculated manipulations stands a woman who learned early that love was currency, not gift, that affection must be earned through performance, not received through being, that the heart was a marketplace where sincerity was too expensive to afford. Her betrayal was not born from malice, but from the tragic belief that authenticity was a luxury she could not risk, that vulnerability was a door she dared not open, lest the wind blow out the candle of acceptance she had worked so desperately to keep lit. You understand now that her deception was self-deception first. She had betrayed her own truth so thoroughly that betraying yours felt natural, even necessary. She lived in a hall of mirrors, where every reflection showed her the face she thought others wanted to see, until she forgot entirely what her own face looked like beneath the makeup of manipulation. Her lies to you were extensions of the lies she told herself every morning. The fiction that she could find love by being lovable rather than by being loved for who she truly was. The abandoner who left when you needed the most. You see him now with the clarity that comes only after one has learned to never abandon oneself. Behind his flight stands a man terrified of his own inadequacy, convinced that your need would reveal his emptiness, that your crisis would expose his inability to be the solid ground you required. His abandonment was not cruelty but cowardice, the cowardice of one who had never learned to trust his own capacity to hold space for pain, to be present with difficulty, to love imperfectly but faithfully. You realize that his leaving was less about you and more about his own fear of being found wanting, his terror that in the bright light of your need, his own shadows would be exposed. He ran not from your darkness, but from the possibility that his light might not be strong enough to stand beside it without being extinguished. His abandonment was a preemptive strike against his own anticipated failure, a self-fulfilling prophecy, born from a lifetime of being told that love was conditional on strength, that care was earned through invulnerability. This compassion that blooms within you is not the naive forgiveness of one who has never been hurt, but the sophisticated mercy of one who has been to hell and back and learned to map the geography of human suffering. You understand now that every person who caused you pain was themselves in pain. That cruelty is not born in a vacuum, but in the suffocating atmosphere of unprocessed trauma, unlived authenticity, unexpressed truth. Yet this understanding does not make you weak, it makes you magnificent. Like the lotus that grows in muddy water yet emerges pristine. You have learned to extend compassion without contamination, to see clearly without cynicism, to understand without excusing. You have developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in tension without being torn apart by their contradiction. You can feel compassion for the one who hurt you without inviting them back into your life. You can understand that pain without making it your responsibility to heal. You can see their humanity without sacrificing your boundaries. You can forgive without forgetting, love without trusting, have mercy without becoming a martyr. This is the sophisticated compassion of the individuated soul, discriminating, bounded, fierce in its gentleness, and gentle in its fierceness. The manipulator who sought to control your every move. You see her now as a woman drowning in her own powerlessness, grasping for control over others because she had never learned to trust her own ability to navigate life's uncertainties. Her need to manipulate was born from her own experience of being manipulated. Her compulsion to control arising from a childhood where chaos reigned and the only safety came from vigilant management of every variable, every person, every outcome. You understand that her manipulation was not strength, but desperation. Not mastery, but the frantic flailing of one who had never learned to swim in the unpredictable waters of authentic relationship. She could not trust in love freely given because she had never received it, could not believe in acceptance without conditions because her own acceptance had always come with strings, attached like a marionette to a master's hand, your ex-partner, who broke your heart with calculated precision. You see him now as a man so afraid of his own capacity for love that he learned to break things before they could break him. Behind his emotional cruelty stands a boy who learned that vulnerability was weakness, that attachment was danger, that the safest way to love was to never fully arrive in the relationship, to always keep one foot poised for flight. His cruelty was armor, his coldness a fortress built around a heart too tender to survive in a world that had taught him that softness was synonymous with suffering. This profound seeing transforms you in ways that pure strength never could. You become like the ancient trees that have weathered countless storms, not because they were rigid, but because they learned to bend without breaking, to remain rooted while allowing their branches to dance with whatever winds might come. Your compassion becomes a form of alchemy, transmuting the lead of resentment into the gold of understanding, the base metal of bitterness into the precious substance of wisdom. You realize that carrying anger toward those who hurt you was like carrying hot coals in your bare hands, you were the one being burned. But this compassion is not the weak surrender of your fire. It is the mastery of your flame, the ability to burn with love instead of hate, to shine with understanding instead of rage. You have learned to use your fire to warm rather than destroy, to illuminate rather than consume in this paradoxical space. You discover that compassion is not the opposite of strength, but its highest expression. Only those who have fully integrated their own shadow can look into another's darkness without being pulled into it. Only those who have married their own light and dark can witness another's internal war without taking sides or becoming casualties. You have become what Jung called the wounded healer, one whose own wounds have become windows through which the light of compassion can shine upon others. Suffering. This does not mean you become a doormat for others, dysfunction, or a therapist. For those who refuse to heal, your compassion is discerning, your understanding boundaried. You can see their pain without making it your burden, understand their story without becoming a character in their drama. You'll love them enough to refuse to enable their continued unconsciousness, compassionate enough to hold them accountable for their choices, while understanding that wounds that shaped those choices. You have become like the lotus rooted in the mud of human suffering, yet blooming in the sunlight of consciousness, drawing nourishment from the very darkness that surrounds your roots while extending beauty that remains untainted by its origins. Your compassion is not contaminated by the mud from which it grows, but sanctified by the journey through darkness that made its flowering possible. In this space of paradoxical compassion, you complete your transformation. You are no longer the person who could be broken by others' cruelty, because you understand that their cruelty was never about you. You are no longer the person who could be diminished by others' opinions, because you see that their judgments arise from their own unhealed places. You are no longer the person who could be abandoned by others' departures, because you have learned to hold yourself with the same tenderness you now feel for all wounded beings, stumbling through their own dark nights of the soul. This is your final victory, not over others, but over the illusion of separation that makes enemies out of fellow travelers on the difficult journey of being human. You have achieved the ultimate invincibility, the strength to remain soft, the power to stay open, the courage to love a world that is learning, slowly and often painfully, how to love itself. You stand now as a living testament to the indestructible nature of the human spirit, your very existence proof that the essential self cannot be broken by external forces. What radiates from you now is no longer the desperate gleam of someone seeking approval, like a beggar seeking coins, but the steady, unwavering radiance of one who has discovered their own internal sun. This light that streams from the windows of your being has found its source, not in the flickering candles of others' opinions, but in the eternal flame that burns at the center of your authentic nature. You have become untouchable, but not through the hardness you once thought was strength. This invulnerability comes from something far more radical, the profound softness of complete self-acceptance. Like water that yields to every pressure yet can carve through stone, your gentleness has become your greatest power. You have learned the alchemical secret that the mystics knew. When you stop fighting yourself, you become invincible to the world. The light that emanates from you now carries a quality that transforms everything it touches. It is not the harsh fluorescence of ego assertion or the dim bulb of false humility, but something else entirely, the warm, golden luminescence of integrated being. This is the light Jung called the self, that divine spark that connects you to the eternal while remaining uniquely, impossibly you. It shines with the accumulated wisdom of every wound that became a teaching, every betrayal that became discernment, every loss that became spice or essence. In your presence, pretense withers, like flowers in drought. The masks others wear become suddenly heavy, uncomfortable, unnecessary. You do not demand this authenticity from them. You simply exist so genuinely that falseness cannot survive in your atmosphere. This is not judgment, but invitation, not force, but magnetic pull. Your light does not blind others to their shadows. It illuminates them so gently that they begin to see their darkness as simply unintegrated light. Those who encounter you now feel something they may not have experienced before. The permission to be themselves. Without saying a word, you communicate. The radical possibility that one can exist without apology. Love without condition. Shine without dimming anyone else's flame. You have become a walking example that the spiritual journey does not lead away from humanity, but deeper into it. Not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. The untouchable quality of your light does not mean you are removed from human experience. Instead, you are more present to it than ever before. You feel the full spectrum of emotion, joy and sorrow, anger and compassion, fear and courage. But these feelings move through you, like weather through open sky. They do not define you, or diminish you, because you have learned to identify not with the weather, but with the vast space that contains it all. This light carries within it the memory of darkness. It shines not in ignorance of shadow, but in full knowledge of it. Every beam contains the integrated wisdom of your descents into the underworld of your own psyche. Every ray carries the strength earned through facing what you most feared to. See, this is why your light cannot be extinguished, that has already survived the darkest night of your soul, and emerged, not just intact, but transformed. You have discovered that true invincibility is not the absence of vulnerability, but the full embrace of it. The untouchable light does not protect you from being hurt. It ensures that hurt cannot diminish your essence. When someone's words strike at you now, they pass through your being like arrows through sunlight, knowledged but not absorbed, witnessed but not owned. The pain you feel is clean pain, the kind that teaches and transforms, rather than the muddy pain that only wounds. In relationships, this light changes everything. You no longer love from emptiness seeking to be filled, but from fullness seeking to overflow. You do not give yourself away to earn affection. You share your abundance because it is your nature to do so. Love flows from you not as transaction, but as expression, not as strategy, but as authenticity. Those who are drawn to this quality of love are drawn to the real thing, not to what you can do for them, but to who you are.